It's the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm producer Sam Corey. I'll be here with you throughout the hour to hear some of our favorite stories that happened this week. Let's begin with the high school basketball champs at Renaissance High School in Detroit. Earlier this month, the boys and girls basketball teams won the city championships. Assistant coach for the girls team, Chris Bass, sat down with Tia Graham and Robin Vincent to discuss what led to their victories.
Earlier this month, Renaissance High School boys and girls basketball teams won the city PSL championships. It's the first time in nearly 2 decades that both teams have swept the league. Both were celebrated, but one team received more accolades and attention than the other. And as you may have guessed, it was the boys' team.
Yeah, Robin. And one of those coaches, Chris Bass, decided the girls' win should draw the same excitement and congratulatory words the boys' team received. And you know what, Robin? I actually wrote that and still stumble right over it.
It's a mouthful.
It's a Monday because both had, in fact, accomplished an amazing feat. Chris is one of several coaches and supporters of women's sports who wants to see a shift in sports journalism coverage with more support in spotlight on women and girls in sports. Joining us now to chat more about the win, coaching the girls team, and pushing girls in sports to the front page is Chris Bass. Chris, thanks for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you for having me. It's much appreciated.
Of course, and just want to throw out a quick little note for our listeners out there. Chris and I went to high school together, so we've known each other for a little while now. So I just want to say to you, congrats on the win, number one.
Thank you. I appreciate you. And for those who don't know, Tia was actually a great basketball player for Henry Ford Academy as well. So
don't.
Okay, Chris. Yes, we did need to hear that.
No, we didn't. but thank you, Chris. You were great as well. Let's talk about it then. No, I'm kidding. But let's talk about the season leading up to this win. Can you talk just a little bit about what you guys had cooking in the beginning and then when you knew you had something going?
Well, it's actually my first year on staff. Head coach Deshaun Wood brought me aboard, and our girls, have showed up from the start and worked hard. And we started the season 11-0 before we took our first loss, and then won another 9 straight, which ended with the city championship complete. And we were the first team to 20 wins this season. And I believe the only the girls team in the PSL with 20 wins. So it's been a long road. We've played Heartland, we've played Grass Lake, we've played a team from Chicago. So we've had a pretty competitive schedule to try to keep our girls battle tested.
And, just sticking there for one moment, just talking about the season in general, we know that travel leagues and those type of leagues, AAU leagues, are really, really big right now. So can you talk about the importance of taking this particular girls team to play different teams across the state, not just in Detroit?
Well, it's very much important just because you never know how good your league is going to be year in and year out. And the PSL historically has been a very good league, but also everybody else around the state is catching up. So it's important that we're always using iron and sharp iron by going to find other schools, other teams that present challenges we don't see on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. This is your first year, and, just for us having a personal connection, and I see you on socials, and I see the things that you talk about often, especially in support of WNBA, women's basketball, girls in basketball as well. Seeing you in this role is really, really great. So, just continuing on, talk about how important of an impact it was for you to see someone like the late, great Kobe Bryant, a.k.a. the Black Mamba, supporting girls' sports in the way that he did before he passed away.
Oh, it was. It's been tremendous for me. He actually was a huge inspiration. I mean, I've been a fan of girls' sports, women's sports since I was a kid. My favorite college was UConn. Growing up, I was a big Diana Taurasi fan. Me and Maya Moore are the same age, so it's kind of like that. She was my favorite player. So I've always been a big fan of it, but also seeing Kobe kind of take that direction with the coaching, with the advocacy, and just kind of keeping the main thing when we talk about that it's basketball. It really shouldn't matter whether it's girls basketball or boys basketball or really sports in general. Like, women are athletes that should be held to the same standards that we hold our men to.
And it's really important to have men in support of women in sports as well. Of course, it's one thing to have the women supporting other women, but having men supporting women as well, just it kind of adds on to and build on to this, what we're trying to do here. So let's just go to the, I guess, elephant in the room, but you decided to reach out to a media organization about the coverage of the boys versus girls win. Why was that? What did you see in that coverage that you didn't like or you wanted to see improved?
Well, so what happened is that the Detroit News came out to cover the game, and what it sounds like after talking it over with them is that there was some confusion over which game was supposed to be covered, whether it was the boys or the girls. So, and we were able to clear that up relatively quickly. But again, there just was a full breakdown of the boys' game where, they talked about different key points in the game, players, their stats, whereas it was a paragraph about our girls. And, like I said, and I don't really believe that was fair just because our girls worked very hard. Like I said, we were the only team in the PSL with 20 wins. So I do think that should be celebrated and that should be given a little bit more room to be saw versus just a paragraph. And to the credit of that outlet, they agreed to work with us to try to tell the story from a better light.
And Chris, is this difference in coverage between boys and girls sports? We know it's common, but talk a little bit about how common it is and why you decided to speak out.
Well, I just think a lot of it is what people are used to. People are used to things being a certain way. They follow tradition. And, for example, my stepmother came to the game to support us, and she was leaving after our game concluded, and the boys' game was following right afterwards. And one of the fans said, "You're leaving for the best game." And it's just the idea. And listen, and that's nothing against that particular fan, but it's just how we've been conditioned to think that the girls are just an appetizer and the boys are the main course. Yeah. And again, that's not an indictment on the boys program because they did a tremendous job this year. Coach White and his entire staff of those boys, they played an extremely battle-tested schedule as well, so they deserve everything that they're getting, and I want to be clear about that. But it's just what we've been conditioned to believe. We've been conditioned to believe that, well, it's girls' sports. It's not that big of a deal. They're not as good. They don't jump as high, so it's not as exciting. But in reality, women and girls play the game from a strong fundamental standpoint, as whereas boys get away with not having strong fundamentals due to athleticism. So, and of course, that's minutia to a casual fan. So, but what we have to do is do a better job of kind of explaining and making it aware that, that women's sports are just as valuable as men's sports. It's just as entertaining from a tactical standpoint. And the true fans of the game will find love no matter the gender.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with Chris Bass. He's the assistant coach for the girls' championship basketball team at Renaissance High School. Chris, let's shift a little bit and talk about coverage in terms of women's professional basketball today. It's been getting more attention, long overdue attention. I'm wondering, has this coverage, has it helped the girls of the Renaissance basketball team to envision basketball after college to see that there could be a career path for them? I mean, it's not a wide career path. Certainly, it's still quite a tough one to get onto, but it's been a lot harder, I think, in the past for girls to envision themselves in the shoes of these professional players. Do you think that's changing?
I most certainly do. So I have a little bit of experience with the professional landscape of women's basketball as well. And what happens is a lot of our girls have to go overseas to play just because, before an expansion team was added that's coming this year with the Golden State Valkyries, there are only 12 teams, so 144 jobs. So like a lot of girls get cut year in and year out, and there are more than 144 professional women's basketball players. So a lot of them go to countries like Italy and over in Europe and things of that nature to further their careers. And what that does is it creates a thing where it's out of sight, out of mind. So a girl comes home and she could have been playing for a decade overseas, but because it's not right here in our face, we don't really have that image to look to. So I think with the expansion of the WNBA, our girls that are growing up get to see women who grew up in their communities that played high school, college basketball, and professional basketball. They get to see it on an American platform, and I think that does broaden their horizon and broaden their room to dream about seeing themselves in that position.
Before we let you go, Chris, what did the girls on the team think about you making a little bit of a fuss about the disparity in coverage?
Well, they probably think that it's just me being doing too much at times. But I mean, I know that they secretly appreciate it, and again, it's something that'll probably they'll probably resonate with them a little bit later in life, because right now they're super locked in to what our goal is. It's a group that's really kind of low maintenance in that aspect. They want the credit and attention, but at the end of the day, it's about ball.
That was Tia Graham and Robin Vincent speaking with Chris Bass. He's the assistant coach for the girls basketball team at Renaissance High School in Detroit. They recently won the city championships. Coming up, the Michigan Democrats have a new party chair. We'll hear about what the direction he hopes to take the party next. Welcome back to the Metro on WDET Detroit Public Radio. I'm producer Sam Corey. Both the Michigan Democratic and Republican parties recently elected new chairs. This week, we spoke with Curtis Hertel, the new chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. Here was that conversation.
In November, the Democrats took a lot of hits. At the national level, Republicans now control both chambers of Congress, in addition to the Supreme Court and the White House. In Michigan, the bleeding wasn't as bad, but Democrats did lose the State House, and many claim they missed a lot of opportunities during November's lame duck session. Now, losses, they can be painful, but they're also an opportunity to do something differently, a chance to win back power.
And thus far, Robin, Democrats have been positioning themselves as a party of collaborators. This seems especially true after Governor Gretchen Whitmer went to the White House on Saturday to, quote, find common ground. Building trust with Republicans seemed to be a part of the plan. But what are Democrats' overall goals? What are the lessons they think are most important to take from their losses? To discuss this now, we have Curtis Hertel Jr. here. He's the new chair of the Michigan Democratic Party, a former state legislator and congressional candidate. Chair Hertel, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Of course. And just to note, the Metro has contacted Michigan's Republican Party to speak with its new chair, State Senator Jim Runstad. We are currently working to get him on the program as well. So starting with you, Chair Hertel, let's start here. Why did you want to be the Michigan Democratic Party chair?
Well, I believe the Democratic Party is a force for good in the world. That's why I've given my entire life to running for office, using those positions to try to make people's lives better, and helping get Democrats elected, help take the state Senate back for the first time in 40 years. For me, we are at a really important time. And it means we need to rethink everything we do, how we organize, how we fundraise, how we communicate. Everything has to be rethought as we head into this next cycle, which will be a huge effect on people across the state.
And Chair Hertel, Democrats still run the state Supreme Court, the state Senate, and the governor's mansion, but they did lose the state house. And just listening to you and talking about this, a new approach to things, why do you think that happened?
Well, listen, I think that we obviously, the year turned out to not be what we would have hoped for. I think that's absolutely true. I do think that a big part of that is that Democrats have to remember who we are. We are a party of working people. And if we're not the party that's fighting for water affordability, if we're not the party that's fighting for affordable housing, if we're not the party that's fighting for wages and working conditions, if we're not that party, then there won't be a party in America fighting for those things. And so, I think that Democrats, when you look at our record, I mean, we passed the largest tax cut for working families in history in Michigan, brought 30,000 kids out of poverty. We ended the retirement tax. We expanded workers' rights. We had the largest investment in affordable housing in Michigan's history. But I don't think we talked about that on the campaign trail. And so for me, I think we got to get back to actually talking about the things and accomplishments that we have and make sure that workers understand that we're fighting for them every single day. And I think if we can get back to that agenda, if we can get back to that conversation, we'll do much better in the elections in 26.
And, you're mentioning making some big changes. I know you are new to this role. What do you need to do to win back some of that power? What do you need to do in order to change that messaging a little bit? You just talked about it a little bit, speaking to those who are the working class. But, I mean, I know we've heard that in the past, but what does it really look like tangibly?
So we got to get out actually on the ground. And so we need to hire more organizers. I think people are a little tired of us showing up in September and asking for their vote. We need to be part of that community, part of that conversation early on. And so, I'm going to launch a listening tour around the state to talk about a working families agenda, to listen to people. That's a big thing I think the Democratic Party needs to do better is have a willingness to listen to people, but really getting into those communities early and investing in organizers and conversations early. And so to me, it's just a matter of, when I took over the state Democratic caucus, we were at 11 seats. We had less members than the Wu-Tang Clan. We could caucus in an elevator. And it was my job to actually recruit candidates, raise money, and try to build an agenda that actually brought us to majority. And we did that for the first time in 40 years. I'm upset we lost the trifecta. I think it'll be worse for working families because of it. We got to rebuild, organize, if we want to win in 2026, and that's what we're going to do.
And, Michigan is a large state. How do you weave together voters who live in both its cities, suburbs, and rural areas? How are you connecting all the dots and making sure that you are speaking to everyone in a time where not everyone feels like they're being spoken to?
Well, I will tell you, that was the biggest thing I learned on the campaign trail running for chair. I traveled across the state. We were in the Upper Peninsula, and we were in the city of Detroit. We were in Macomb County, but we were in Mecosta County too. And what I could tell you is that everywhere I went, people felt like they weren't being heard. And it's a real problem when people feel like they don't have a connection to something they believe in so much. And these are a lot of people who actually give their blood, sweat, and tears to the Michigan Democratic Party and feel like they have not been heard. So what I'm going to do moving forward is actually invest in time with them and listening tours across our state. So we're going to go to every county in the next 83 years, in the next year, all 83 counties. There's still counties that don't have a Democratic Party. We're going to make sure that we build one. And we're going to provide a voice for people and a listening ear as well. So I think it's got to be a combination of those things in order to rebuild. And really, when you look at this last election, we lost ground in urban, suburban, and rural areas. There's no place. It was a death in many ways by 1,000 cuts. And so we got to fix it all at once. That can be daunting, but I'm excited and ready to get on the ground and do it.
And, just hearing that come out of your mouth right now, Chair Hertel Jr., it's very significant because it's something that oftentimes colloquially we talk about on the ground, honestly. It's just the lack of communication, I guess, or a lack of back and forth we have with some of our leaders. So thank you for saying that. But getting back on topic, many inside and outside the Democratic Party believe November's lame duck session was a missed opportunity. It ended after a days-long boycott by Republicans and one Democrat, and the result was that dozens of bills did not pass, including transparency laws, a water affordability program, and tighter gun controls laws. So from your position, what happened?
Well, Republicans refused to go to work. I mean, here's the thing. I served in the legislature in the minority my entire time. It was frustrating. I promise you that. There were days where I knew that if I made every argument right, if I did everything right, that I wouldn't get to win the day. But I always showed up for work. And the idea that you would have members, the Republican Party, the Republican speaker refused to actually go and make the case for what he believed in and just sit out in the hallway. I never considered doing that because at the end of the day, that's not your job. Even on the toughest days, I always felt like my job was to actually work for the people of Michigan, negotiate and get things done. And so I think it's a bad precedent that that's the way we're going to behave. At the end of the day, I think that most people would like Republicans and Democrats to at least be willing to sit down and actually try to solve problems together, and that has to happen. But
yeah. Just really quickly to jump in, I'm so sorry to jump in, but are the Democrats accountable for any of the lame duck session chaos that we saw? Democrats weren't fully united in that situation as well. So we do know that we did see exactly what was happening on one end, but on the other end, it was just still a little confusion for us. So what can we say the Democrats' role is in this?
Well, I would say this. There was one Democrat, you want to call them a Democrat, that's fine, who didn't stand in session. I will also point out that the Senate Democratic Caucus stayed in session for a record amount of time and continued to pass bills that I think were important. And right now, Leader Hall is not fulfilling his actual constitutional duties to send those bills to the governor's desk. So you have still now Republicans sitting in power and refusing to actually follow their constitutional duties. And so, listen, I get it. We as Democrats sometimes want the circular firing squad. But at some point, it's important to acknowledge the fact one Democrat, quote-unquote Democrat, didn't show up for work. All the Republicans didn't, and now they still won't follow their constitutional duties, and we're trying to figure out which Democrat to blame back and forth. I think we have a responsibility to actually say, do we have to fix our house sometimes? Sure. But their house is also in a disaster, and we're not having that conversation.
Yeah, we just heard from Congresswoman Dingell, and she talked about how you often get into that calling names and, back and forth within the own party, but got to come together. So you're listening to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with Curtis Hertel Jr., the latest chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. We're discussing what direction the party is headed. Now, in November, Chair Hertel, you lost a congressional race to now Representative Tom Barrett. Why do you think you lost that race? And does it say anything about what needs to change to the Democratic Party more broadly?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, we obviously were outfunded by national groups that basically based their entire campaign on character assassination. And also, we have to reform our one campaign, our organizational structure, because it was so much about the top of the ticket, there wasn't enough partnership with races down ballot. And I think that's really one of the major reforms I want to do. When you look at our campaign structure, it should be a real coordinated campaign that should be about Sure, top of the ticket's important, but also the state Senate and state House and county commission races and school board that touches people's lives. When you really think about it, winning the governor's race is great, but that's just a goalie. I want to go on offense, which means we have to take back the state House and hold the state Senate. So that'll be my focus here.
Let's stay on the topic of funding, but a very different aspect of it. Some Democrats, along with some Republicans, have been shifting away from giving corporations money to spur the economy. What do you think Democrats should be pushing for to encourage economic growth here?
So I think it's important to realize that we're sometimes in a unique experience where the battery jobs of tomorrow. I live in Lansing, Michigan. Lansing, Michigan wouldn't exist if we weren't an automobile town. We're sure we have state government and MSU, but the real driver of our community and why we have such a vibrant middle class here and is Lansing. I mean, the best bars in Lansing are outside of plants. And so, when the auto industry is a risk and you could lose a significant portion of the jobs that people have, I do think it's important that we have to look at those options. That being said, the long-term economic growth for this state is investing in people. And so we got to make sure that we're investing in a world where people can afford to send their kids to college. People can afford to raise a family. This generation is the slowest generation in American history to buy a house, to buy a car, to start a family. And it's not cultural. It's because at the end of the day, in 1960, the average CEO made 50 times what their employee makes, and now it's 365 times. Greed has actually prevented the middle class from actually expanding. And so we have got to be the party that's actually calling that out and has policies that actually solve those problems for families. So like I've said, we need to make it easier for people to be part of to be part of Michigan, to be able to survive in Michigan, and that's something that Democrats are going to continue to fight for.
Chair Hertel, you've offered some clear messaging about what you see needs to happen, but the same can't be said for a lot of people in your party. Democrats have been criticized for not being clear enough with their message. Do you think that's a legitimate criticism? And what is the Democrats' message right now?
Well, if you're saying that we have to be louder, I don't disagree with that whatsoever. I mean, I would say that we launched in my chair's campaign, and something we're going to continue at the party, was a website for people to tell their individual stories about how the executive orders are affecting them. And I think it can feel like there's so much going on, and all the attacks on our economy, our attacks on federal employees, our attacks on veterans that you just heard about in your last call, that people can feel like it's overwhelming. I think the way we actually move back is to actually tell individual stories. I think sometimes people are sick of hearing from politicians. Sometimes I think it's actually individual people on the ground that actually make the difference. And so we launched that. We got amazing stories of people who are federal researchers that study cancer drugs and are going to lose their fellowships and maybe not even be able to go to school next year.
Chair Hertel, forgive me for jumping in. Would you say that kind of messaging has been missing? I mean, is this the messaging you're talking about now? It sounds like it's not necessarily that it needs to be louder, but that it needs to be different.
Listen, I'm a big believer that when you are trying to rebuild something, you have to think differently. So I do think this is different, and I think it's important. I think it's important that we amplify voices of individual people that have been affected, because in all honesty, this chaos of the Trump administration is affecting people's businesses. It's affecting people's jobs. It's affecting the way that people survive. And also, like I just said, the future of cancer research in America. So I understand that people feel like there's so much going on that it's hard to respond. We need to give them the tools to be able to do that. And that's why we're collecting these stories.
Before we let you go, I know Michigan Democrats don't have much control over foreign policy, but the war in Gaza, which now has become a ceasefire, a fragile one at that, has attracted a lot of attention, and it's split a lot of Democrats in the state of Michigan. Do Michigan Democrats need a position on the war that's happened in Gaza and on the state of Israel that unites them together?
So we put together a big coalition for this chair's race. I was endorsed by the Arab American Caucus and the Jewish Caucus, and lots of other organizations as well, the high school Dems, the college Dems, the Michigan Democratic Party Black Caucus, all of labor. But for me, what the Democratic Party has to be a place for is that people can disagree on issues and can still find the places where they do agree. And so we're a big tent. That's always going to be the case for the Democratic Party. I think where we failed is that that people didn't feel like we were a place where they could have those types of conversations. And at the end of the day, we have to be respectful of all the voices in the Democratic Party, and we need to be willing to listen.
That was Tia Graham and Robin Vincent speaking with Curtis Hertel, the new chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. Stay tuned next week for a conversation with the new leader of the Michigan GOP, State Senator Jim Runstead. Coming up, the Trump administration has been making a lot of cuts to the federal government. We'll hear from one Ann Arbor Veterans Affairs employee who was recently fired. Welcome back to the Metro. I'm producer Sam Corey. I've been here with you throughout the hour. The Trump administration has been making a lot of cuts. And up next, we'll speak with Andrew Lennox, former military officer and Veteran Affairs employee who lives in Ann Arbor and was recently fired. Here was that conversation.
Losing a job is hard. It can make you question your self-worth. It can strain relationships, upend plans for the future, and make it hard to pay bills and get by. Thriving becomes surviving. A lot of federal workers could now be confronting some of these predicaments. That's because from the National Park Service to FEMA, thousands of people have been laid off as part of the Trump administration's efforts to, quote, make agencies more efficient. Under the leadership of Elon Musk, the Department of Government Efficiency is slashing jobs across more than a dozen agencies, including the Department of Veterans Affairs.
And Robin, that means 10-year Marine Corps veteran Andrew Lennox is now without a job. Lennox was working as an administrative officer in the primary care department at the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs in Ann Arbor. He joins us now. Andrew, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. And before we get into what happened with your job at the Department of Veteran Affairs, could we talk about your time in the U.S. Marine Corps? What drew you to become a Marine?
Honestly, it was, again, my family's gotten so much from this country, and I feel like it's only right that we should give something back. And, it was after college, I was traveling and teaching in the Middle East and seeing what was happening there during the Arab Spring. It kind of made me want to stop being an observer and kind of, what's happening in history and then be a participant in it. So I quit my job teaching at a nonprofit, came back to Michigan, and enlisted in the Marine Corps as an infantryman.
Wow. Andrew, before we continue to move on, can you talk about that, the importance of being in service to those around you, not just, to the country, of course, but being in service to those, especially when you saw the impacts that were happening in other places and spaces. Talk about how that changed you.
Yeah, honestly, it gave me a great appreciation for what we have here. Again, there are a lot of things that can be improved in our country and our government and everything, but seeing the fragility of democracy happening overseas and, for example, the thing that really struck with me, it sounds kind of boring, but was building codes, right? During the Egyptian Revolution, when there was nobody inspecting buildings, these unauthorized high-rise apartment buildings just started going up left and right. And one down the street from me collapsed, and several families were killed in it. And I was like, wow, I never realized how important these government structures that you need building codes, inspections. It seems like a pain here if you want to put in a fence in your backyard, but these are things that we kind of take for granted that keep us safe, and it's unique to the United States.
And as you're speaking about that, of course, we're going to have a conversation about all of the jobs that are impacted right now due to federal administration things that are happening right now. So I'm thinking about what you're talking about, and I want you to expand on that just a little bit about the things that we take for granted in terms of regulations and the things that are happening around us. I mean, a lot of us don't think about what it takes to keep us safe.
Yeah, it's the people that are keeping us safe, whether it's our water, our air, to make sure that veterans aren't being taken advantage of by like predatory online universities, and again, like our parks, like people that just want to maintain these resources that we have that are they spend their entire time in college up their eyeballs in student loans most of the time to make a job that's not paying a lot because they genuinely care about this country and these people, and everything that we have. And it's things that, like, again, once it's gone, you don't really realize how important it is. And that's like, the building codes. And that's what I saw. And then as I'm seeing and hearing more of these federal employees that are they're being terminated too. I know the word layoff is being used all the time, but this is a straight up termination. People are being fired for performance because if you were laid off, there's proper protections and policies involved in it. But every single person across the board has gotten the same copy and pasted email that says, due to your performance, you've not demonstrated that further employment would be in the interest of the agency. And that's kind of, it's extremely dishonest. And it's, again, a slap in the face to all these federal workers across the board, whatever agency or department, majority of them, most of them, everybody I've met were either too new to get a performance evaluation or they were a probationary employee because they'd just been promoted.
And Andrew, I'm sorry to step in, but could you talk about your personal experience as well? What was it like to see an email or communication saying that, you know what, I don't think that your job is, or your performance or your job is important right now to the government?
Like if it was my boss in the hospital that said it, I'd believe him 100%. I'd say, you understand my performance and I trust your judgment. And same thing if it was the director of my hospital or the director of our region or VISN, for the area. If they told me that, yeah, but instead it was somebody from Washington, D.C. who had never spoken to me, had to Google who she was, as I got this. And I was like, cool, so this is disingenuous and this is arbitrary and this is not on performance. This is across-the-board termination.
Thank you, Andrew.
I don't trust much that they say if they're using the same excuse for 11,000 people.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And you're listening to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with U.S. Marine Corps veteran Andrew Lennox. He's one of thousands of federal workers who was recently fired as part of what President Trump and Elon Musk have described as a plan to make the government more efficient. Andrew, I wonder if we could talk about your job at the Veterans Affairs healthcare system in Ann Arbor, when you were hired and what you were doing for the VA exactly.
Yeah, so I was officially hired. My first day of work was December 16th. Like, I'm a new guy. There's no getting around that. But it's a 6-month process usually, to get into the federal government, and even longer if you work in a position that requires like a security clearance and an in-depth background check. And my job in primary care as an administrative officer was all the behind-the-scenes administrative work that it took to support hundreds of doctors and the thousands of patients that we treated. And it was, managing our program specialists, and what that, again, it's all the nitty-gritty stuff that nobody really wants to do, making sure all of our hours are accurate, making sure we don't overpay people, making sure our doctors have the proper credentials and are certified so they're able to prescribe medication. They're within compliance to order, procure, and maintain our equipment and supplies, from latex gloves to tens of thousands of dollars of imaging equipment. It's to really just take all of the red tape and the friction off of our care providers, whether it be doctors, nurses, social workers, anybody in our department, and so they can do their job and focus on the veterans.
What did you like most about the work?
I just love being surrounded by veterans. Like it's that's my family. Those are my people. It's not just the veterans, because the people that work at the VA, a lot of them are veterans. The other half have family members that were veterans, and it's a unique group of people that come together for a common mission. It's not a bottom line. We're not beholden to shareholders. We're beholden to those people that, signed a contract to put, their life on the line for our freedoms, our country. And the absolute least we can do is give them the best care possible. And that's what we do at the Ann Arbor VA.
So it sounds like working for the Ann Arbor VA allowed you in some shape or form to continue your service to the country. Yeah,
exactly. Like I look at, all the veterans and everything they've done before us, the World War II veterans, Korea, Vietnam, the global terror or global war on terror guys that came before I was in, like everything I've gotten, these institutions that gave me so much as far as leadership, mentorship, and the good things that we were able to do overseas. Like I owe it to every single one of those veterans that comes to that hospital. Just saying, like, thank you for what you did before, and thank you for the world and the military and the country that you provided for me today. So the least I can do is make sure we don't waste as much money as possible to get them the best possible care. And yeah, it's an honor. Like again, it's my family though. It's not something you do for thanks. It's something you do because it's the right thing to do.
Mm. And so your colleagues, who I'm sure also felt then like family, who were fired, what are some of them doing now? Can you speak to what life is like for them right now?
It's a lot of uncertainty for everybody, especially for people that were like the sole income of their family. Because again, this wasn't a layoff. This wasn't something where we got a message from HR that walked us through when our next paycheck would be, or the continuation of benefits, or what future work in the government would look like. It was an email sent at 7:30 in the evening that said, "Turn in your laptop and any government equipment you have tomorrow." And so now people they're scrambling. They're like, "Can I get my job back?" I don't know. There's an appeals process, but that's going to be flooded with applications. There's legal channels, but like again, they have time on the other side of this equation. We don't have time. People's bank accounts are draining. We have families to support. We don't have the time or the luxury of time and money that people need to fight this legally. And that's a bummer. People are scared and they're terrified.
How did you feel when you got that email? You said at 7:30 at night.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was going through your mind?
Initially, I laughed because it's the dark humor of the military. Like, oh, wow. All right, I'm fired. It's really happened. And then, again, as I'm reading, I was like, my performance? Are you really? And, again, check in with colleagues. Yep, I got the same thing. My colleague who had recently been promoted, that worked their way up from a secretarial role all the way to a supervisor, a spouse of a disabled veteran. They have families. I was like, you got the same email? And like, yes. I was like, you were just promoted. Yeah. So the insincerity is what really, and now it's anger. I'm angry because they lied to all of these people who have done nothing but give their heart and soul to this country and these agencies. And they just copy and pasted it. And they're labeling everybody poor performers. And now that's the defense of anybody that's, celebrating these cuts. They're like, hey, I've never heard of a low performer actually saying they're low performers, and then they giggle and walk away. It's like, no, these are hahighly competent and capable employees that were lumped in one giant group. And because of that, we did not treat them with the dignity that we would somebody we'd be, letting go in a reduction in force.
So it adds insult to injury here. You would have preferred at least for some transparent language instead of attacking something that for veterans is very close to their mission and to the work that they've done, and that's integrity and performance, right?
Yeah, 100%. You spend 10 years, defending the ideas of America as, truth, justice, fairness. And then I'm literally emailed a lie. Like it's like I was like, wow, okay, what was all that for then? If we're just gonna we lose all credibility if we aren't acting honestly, especially to our federal employees. Like our government is held to a higher standard, and that standard has disappeared now. And it's a shame. It's the worst thing because we have an amazing country. It's not perfect, but again, it doesn't have to be perfect to be worth defending. And that's the beautiful thing about it. And what we want to do is maintain the integrity of our country and these institutions, and that's gone out the window right now.
Andrew, some people are saying that we need to cut waste, that we need to reduce government spending, and that the VA is a place where that should happen. What do you say to people who believe that we need to shrink government and that they like what the Trump administration has been doing?
Yeah, and that's a very fair point and fair opinion on there. Like, it is a government. Like I said, nothing is perfect. There are definitely ways that we can make every agency more efficient. But I would say, again, I don't know which part of the art of the deal it says to fire people across the board without consulting their supervisors or giving them enough time to do a proper transfer of authority to make sure that the agency has all the information of what they were currently working on so somebody can finish it tomorrow. Because it's just, yeah, we can fix it, and we can, but we should probably consult the people on the ground. We should probably consult the supervisors that are running that service. They're like, hey, if I fire this guy tonight, are we going to be good tomorrow? They didn't ask that. And that's what irritates me too, is jumping the chain of command. They didn't ask my supervisor. And like, that's a man that, like, my job is to support him and our agency. And like, the fact that they didn't give him that respect, or anybody, the director of our hospital, like, obviously efficiency is not your priority if you're not including the stakeholders on the ground of what you're trying to do.
Did you vote for President Trump in the last election?
I'll tell you this. I try to remain as apolitical as possible in this, but I'll tell you I disagree with a lot of John McCain's politics, all right? But I do not respect anybody that would denigrate his service as a prisoner of war. And I think if somebody does, it's a big indication of their character and what they truly value.
Before we let you go, and I think you've talked about this a little bit, but I'd like to give you the chance to distill it for our listeners one last time. Why did you decide to speak out about getting fired from the VA healthcare system?
This is what I was trained to do. This is what our service members do. We defend people who can't defend themselves. We do everything in our power to just make sure that, like, truth and justice is up there. Again, it's the military. There's a lot of flaws in it, but there is a fundamental, value that we all support, and that's truth and honesty. And if there are people, because there are people that are terrified to speak up, rightfully so, they could be terminated. They're afraid they're going to email, but somebody has to acknowledge that what is happening is wrong and it's dishonest. And it's hurting people. It's hurting our employees, and it's hurting our veterans. And it's tearing down these institutions that we've worked so hard to build and makes our country great. So, yeah, because I have to. That's why I have to.
U.S. Marine Corps veteran Andrew Lennox, thank you so much for sharing your story with us here on the Metro.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That was Robin and Tia speaking with Andrew Lennox, who was fired from his job at the VA earlier this week. We also spoke earlier this week with Executive Director at the Oakland County Republican Party, Denise Elias. Robin asked her about her response to the job cuts that were made at the VA.
Those job cuts resulted in 1,000 people losing their jobs, one of whom we spoke to last hour. His name is Andrew Lennox, a former Marine. And he said that this firing was done chaotically and it put the VA in a really poor position to assist the public. What's your message to former federal workers like Andrew, or the people who rely on the services that the VA provides?
Well, first of all, I would tell you that my father is a veteran and he relies on VA services. So I am very much in tune with what happens at the VA because I take him to all of his VA appointments. What I would say is, an analogy is if you have mold in your house, you are going to have to tear down some drywall in order to make sure you eliminate or eradicate the mold. And in the process, you might cut a wire or maybe even burst open plumbing, and you may not do it exactly correctly. But when you are done, you will have fixed all of those issues and you would have eradicated the bad thing in your home. So I think of it like that. I think that because things are moving quickly, there's a possibility that some mistakes will be made. I also feel very confident that they will be fixed and that the pendulum will swing to where it needs to be in terms of providing services to veterans and everyone else around the country.
Denise, you just mentioned that your father is a veteran, that you're familiar with the crucial services that the VA provides. It has me wondering if Trump takes actions that you might find questionable, and perhaps, let's say, it is making cuts to the VA. Are you willing to come out and say that, this is a president that you voted for, that you supported, but you don't support, let's say, action A, B, or C?
Well, first of all, what I would say is I think that President Trump brought back respect and honor to the military in this country. The military in this country for a very long period of time really did not feel proud of themselves anymore. We have 22 veterans who take their own lives every year. We have people on the streets who are homeless while our government is spending money on illegal immigrants, housing and feeding them. I think that President Trump is loved by the military, and I think he loves them. And in the long run, I believe he will do what is right by them.
That was Robin speaking with Denise Elias of the Oakland County Republican Party. In the next hour, we'll hear about why education advocates in Michigan are concerned about the potential elimination of the Department of Education, which President Trump has vowed to shut down. This is WDET Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. And this is the Metro. Stay with us. It's the Metro on WDET Detroit Public Radio. I'm producer Sam Corey, here with you to review some of our top stories from the week. This week, education advocates in Michigan are concerned about the potential elimination of the Department of Education, which Trump has vowed to shut down. Tia Graham and Robin Vincent spoke with Amber Ariano. She's the executive director for Ed Trust Midwest. She spoke about the possible consequences of shutting down the Department of Education.
Education advocates in Michigan have been sounding the alarm about the potential elimination of the Department of Education. President Trump has vowed to shut down the department, but he can't eliminate it by himself. That would require Congress's approval. Still, advocates are worried that vital programs funded through the department could be cut. And that would hit some of Michigan's most vulnerable students especially hard.
Amber Ariano is one of those advocates. She's the executive director of Ed Trust Midwest, a nonpartisan organization working to level the playing field for vulnerable students in Michigan. Amber, welcome to the Metro.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, Amber, we'll look at how vulnerable students could be affected if the Department of Education sees big cuts. But first, just talk to us about the Department of Education itself. So much K through 12 education is controlled at the local and state level, but the department plays some important roles as well. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So, yeah, the federal government plays a kind of a supporting and watchdog role, particularly for low-income students and students with disabilities. And it's a big role. It includes assisting with funding gaps. Michigan is a state that really struggles with school funding, especially for vulnerable students. And so the U.S. Department of Education really helps us fill in those funding gaps for those kids. It also plays the role of a watchdog, and it tries to ensure of transparency and accountability in funding systems. So making sure that families have honest information about their school's performance, about how their student is doing in schools compared to other schools and districts in the state and in the region where their children attend school. It's sort of like it's a quiet role because it's not, at the forefront. We don't hear directly from the federal government, but it does play a pretty big role in how things operate day to day in our state.
So let's zoom in now on Detroit because it's not funded equally compared to other districts. We know there's a high concentration of poverty in Detroit schools. So could you talk about how Detroit students who come from low-income households could feel the effects from cuts to the Department of Education?
Sure. So this is one of the most important roles that the U.S. Department of Education plays. It funds about $580 million a year in something called Title I funding for low-income students across the state. That's the equivalent of about 13,570 entry-level teacher positions. So without those dollars, we're talking about a massive impact in terms of being able to hiring, addressing critical teacher shortages, especially in hard-to-staff buildings, which do tend to be in higher poverty neighborhoods. Detroit would be a profound impact on Detroit because the amount of Title I dollars that Detroit receives. But the truth is that, Michigan now, about half of students are from low-income backgrounds. And so because of our deindustrialization and the loss of manufacturing jobs over the last 20 to 30 years, our poverty levels have increased across the state. Rural areas would be, I think, really devastated by a loss of Title I funding. Urban areas, including Detroit, would be working-class suburbs. It's hard to imagine any school district in the state that wouldn't be really impacted. So it would be a massive funding cut. I think a big question is if the federal government decides to keep those dollars and doesn't entirely get rid of Title I, what if it decreases? Again, we're talking about a massive hole in terms of local school districts' budgets. And then there's another scenario that folks are also considering about block grants. If this federal government moved the dollars and sent the dollars to states to spend, there could be significant implications for districts like Detroit as well.
And thinking about the city of Detroit itself, definitely noticing, we've noticed for a very, very long time the teacher shortages that we have, and also the building issues that the city of Detroit has as well with the schools. So it's definitely something that would further push the city of Detroit and the Detroit Public Schools Community District into a worse situation. You're listening to The Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with Amber Ariano, the executive director of Ed Trust Midwest, about what potential cuts to the Department of Education could mean for Michigan kids. Now, Amber, the Department of Education plays a big role, as you mentioned, in monitoring how schools are treating kids with disabilities. And we know that the way Michigan schools have treated students with disabilities has already been called into question. A federal investigation found the rights of students with disabilities were violated during the COVID-19 pandemic. Could you first talk a little about that investigation?
Sure. So the department plays a really big role in providing oversight on how students with disabilities are treated by their public schools. There's, as you mentioned, there was a investigation by the federal government into how Michigan supported students with disabilities during the pandemic. There was also a relatively recent lawsuit that came out of Michigan by a student's family. The student graduated from high school without being able to read. His parents had, because of parent-teacher conferences and school report cards and conversations with educators through the years, they thought that he was on track to, be a successful reader, certainly proficient in reading and math when he graduated from high school. And when he didn't, they were sort of blown away. And so there was a lawsuit that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the family won. And I think for a lot of folks in the disability community, it was evidence of very longstanding problems of students with disabilities who are not, that families don't feel that their kids' needs are being met. And there are a variety of ways that the department plays roles in that. There's also the role of funding, as we talked about. U.S. Department of Ed plays a significant role, about $15 billion to states to support students with disabilities. That's an important part of funding for Michigan as well. But they also provide oversight. There's a whole system to make sure that funds that come from the federal government actually are supposed to reach those students, that districts have an obligation to provide services for them. And then there's a whole set of regulations and laws around individual plans for students and to meet their needs under an act called the IDEA Act, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, to ensure that schools are meeting students' individualized education plans. They're called IEPs.
So, Amber, if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like potential cuts to the Department of Education could create a real vacuum when it comes to holding schools accountable for how they're treating kids with disabilities, which we know overall that they are disciplined at a higher rate than their peers who are not disabled. So the concern here from you and other advocates is that we could lose an important level of accountability.
Accountability, yep, and transparency in terms of data. How are those students doing in school? What are opportunity gaps look like for those students and for low-income students and students of color in schools? I think a big question is if the Trump administration decides to continue funding IDEA and Title I, but decides to send those dollars directly to states and then allow states to decide how to spend them, will those dollars actually reach those students? That's a really big concern, not only for low-income students, but for students with disabilities. And because the federal government has had a set of sort of guardrails in place to make sure that the dollars are supposed to be spent on those students, if the federal government withdraws from that role, who will play that role? I do think that state policy leaders and families in Michigan, they get this. They understand the importance of this kind of funding. Certainly, parents understand the importance of transparency and accountability. And so I'm hopeful that Michiganders, families here, policymakers will see the need to step in and address the leadership void if such a void does open up because of changes going on at the federal level.
I mean, gosh, we're talking about a lot of Michigan students that could be affected. I mean, more than 200,000 rely on special education services from IDEA funding. You mentioned, Amber, that you're hearing from state policymakers who understand how important the funding is that's coming from the Department of Education is for Michigan kids. What would you like to see done at the state level, or what could be done if the Trump administration enacts big cuts on the Department of Education? Yeah.
So I think we'll have to, one, that is the sort of immediate need is the importance of Michigan policymakers and congressional leaders and their voices in saying, hey, our kids, our students, our public schools need these dollars. A disruption in dollars would, especially with so little notice, would cause a lot of chaos in public schools, would cause massive budget holes for public schools across the entire state, and we just can't let that happen. So this is a really important moment for Michigan leaders to be communicating in Washington, D.C., the need for that funding stability. I think also the need for the federal government not to withdraw from this really important role. There's a reason why the federal government plays this role. It's because states struggled to serve, to be the watchdog and to be the folks that are being monitored. Right. That's always hard. That's true for any institution. It's certainly not just for government or for state public education systems. And so this is an important moment for leaders, and I think for Michiganders to let their elective representatives know that this matters, that we care about public education, that we care about these students. We care about all students. It doesn't matter what zip code they live in. It doesn't matter if they have a disability. They deserve, to have a great public education and to make sure that their needs are being met in public schools. But schools need funding to do that. They need the staff to do it. They need qualified teachers to do that. There's a whole variety of other kinds of services that, especially for students with disability, need. And so that does take resources. It takes capacity. It takes staff. It's an important moment for Michiganders to make their voices heard, and also for state leaders to be reaching out to D.C. and really voicing support for the role of the Department of Ed and the role that it plays, the essential funding role, the essential watchdog role, the accountability role. All of these are really important.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting these different roles. I wonder, do you think, given that Michigan's legislature is controlled by Republicans now, is it likely state leaders will backstop any federal cuts and act against President Trump? Is that something you're concerned about?
I think it's a big question. We're hopeful that leaders on both sides of the aisle will understand the importance of public education again. This is a statewide problem because of Michigan's former, reliance on manufacturing, and because of the shrinkage in that sector over the last 20 years. Our poverty rate has gone up across the state, with about half of students in public schools coming from low-income backgrounds. This is a big statewide problem. It's certainly not a Detroit problem. It's not an urban problem. Rural districts in particular are very, very reliant on Title I funders, as are many working-class suburbs. Just to give you an example, Morley Stanwood Community Schools, which is located between Muskegon and Cadillac, received almost $700,000 in federal Title I dollars last year. Kentwood Public Schools on the west side of the state near Grand Rapids received $2.5 million in Title I funding during this school year. So these are diverse districts, right? There's no sort of typical Title I district. Title I students are everywhere now, and we do have a challenge with poverty across the state again, just because our job base is just not as robust as it used to be. And that means that families from all different kinds of backgrounds, including in Republican districts, would be affected by the loss of those funds or the loss of accountability for those funds. So we're hopeful, and we, in the conversations that we've had with leaders in Lansing, we feel like there's a real recognition of the importance of these dollars and the importance of making sure that districts are held accountable for using the dollars for the students for whom they're intended.
That was Tia Graham and Robin Vincent speaking with Amber Ariano of Ed Trust Midwest about the ways the Department of Education supports Michigan students. Coming up, a crowded field of candidates are vying to be Detroit's next mayor. We'll learn more about all the people who want to lead the city. Welcome back to the Metro. I'm producer Sam Corey. There are a number of people who've hopped into the race to become Detroit's next mayor. In this conversation, T and Robin spoke with WDET's Russ McNamara, who has been covering all of those candidates.
Amid this very cold weather, Detroit's mayoral race is heating up. A number of announcements at the top of the year has expanded the pool of candidates. 8 people have emerged thus far, vying to lead the city.
WDET's All Things Considered host Russ McNamara has been keeping a close eye on the race, and he's already spoken to a few candidates. He joins Robin and me now to share what he has learned so far. Russ, welcome back to the Metro.
Hey, friends. How are you? The only thing keeping me warm right now is this mayoral race. Can you think of how cold it would be if we didn't have the mayoral race heating us up.
I mean, we already know it's so cold in the D. So
I mean, this is someone who truly loves politics. If the Detroit mayoral race is heating you up, Russ McNamara,
I mean, it's wildly entertaining. I mean, it's been, because Duggan wasn't going to lose in other years. And so now it's wide open, and you can tell by how many people are getting in the race. We're at 8. So, how many more people are going to jump in before it's all over?
I know. And it is still pretty early in the race. So let's talk about what we know so far. Fred Durhal, let's talk about him a little bit.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of interesting. Fred Durhal, he doesn't have like a high name recognition. He only won District 7 by 59 votes. So it's like that was a very tight race. So his dad was involved in politics, and he got out of the state legislature in 2019. So it's pretty interesting what this guy's about.
59 votes, a 59 vote margin. That just makes me think about how impactful and important local races are and how every vote matters. Please vote. Please vote. Please vote.
Please vote. I mean, and speaking of District 7, that's a district I grew up in. So just seeing someone coming out of District 7, it's interesting to see what his plans are for the city. What has he said about his plans?
Yeah, he likes the idea of walkable neighborhoods, and who doesn't, really? I mean, I live in Ferndale. That's the whole thing, right? Detroit only has a few spots that are really, truly walkable. And when you're trying to get around the city, if it's not completely walkable, you're talking about transit. And Durhal frames that as a way to draw people to the city is by improving transit.
When you look at most of the major metropolitan cities that are around our country, they have great regional transit and transit systems. And we're going to have to step into the future. That's going to help us retain some of the talent that is leaving Michigan, that is leaving the city of Detroit.
Can that happen without federal money, though?
It cannot. So we are going to need to have that partnership again with the federal government.
So he's looking for help from the federal government, and that is certainly a more complicated task, especially as we're watching just federal government departments being completely gutted and dismissed of. So why do you think this is going to be difficult for him right now?
Well, I mean, the Biden administration pumped in nearly $1 billion into the city of Detroit. It was a boom for the city. We got, community violence intervention programs from that, infrastructure upgrades for the city. And to be fair, during the first Trump administration, the opportunity zones, the tax breaks for people that wanted to develop, they did spur some growth in the city. So, but there's no indication that kind of program is coming from the current Trump administration. So if you're looking for raw cash for some projects, it might be difficult over the next few years.
And is he exploring other options for cash? Are there other options for cash?
Well, when we talk about other options for cash, there's a couple ways you could look at it. Durhal said he would like to work with the new governor, whomever that is. If it's one of 3 Detroiters vying for that office, and Mike Duggan, Jocelyn Benson, and Garland Gilchrist, though Gilchrist hasn't officially announced yet, but the rumbles are there. It might be easier. Republican-led legislatures and governors have been fairly stingy and distant towards Detroit in prior administrations, but Durhal wasn't exactly ruling out some taxes.
We examine all of those ways, but I think there are some other creative ways that we can use to be able to generate revenue here in the city.
And that creativity likely wouldn't amount to levying new taxes on city residents, maybe try to get around it via other ways.
And I actually did see you interview Chantel Jenkins in the studio this week. What did she have to say?
She's got an interesting career path. Basically, how she got here, she was a social worker by trade, eventually considered politics after interning for the late, great Marianne Mahaffey. She became Detroit City Council president, then left to become the CEO of the Heat and Warmth Fund. When I asked her if she regretted that decision, she said no.
When I left City Council, we were exiting the bankruptcy. The 10-year plan of adjustment, by the way, was in place. So we were actually coming out of the turmoil and setting the stage for, the growth that we're now seeing.
So why come back now?
because the next mayor is going to determine the trajectory of this city for generations to come.
Now, Jenkins says the city needs to stop focusing on just one area and putting all the resources there and then moving on to a different neighborhood.
Meaning the downtown?
Right. Downtown, Midtown, that corridor, and maybe even out towards the Avenue of Fashion, Livernois. There between 8 and 7 Mile. So she says that she wants to be able to kind of move things around a bit and spread the wealth, as it were.
It doesn't have to be that we pick winners and losers. It should be, and that's part of why that master planning process is so important, because we can do a little bit everywhere. And if we continue to do a little bit everywhere each year, we will start to see the progress spread throughout the city.
Again, a little let on details, but then again, nothing is going to be like fully fleshed out, especially at this point in the campaign for anybody. I get the impression that she wants to work with city council to develop a comprehensive plan to do all of this, the master plan she talked about. She just wants to make things livable for folks in the city.
We're making sure that our neighborhoods are safe places and spaces for kids, for families, for seniors. We're creating businesses and business opportunities and jobs for Detroiters throughout the city, not just downtown.
So Jenkins is leaving her position at Thaw, and Kimberly Burton has been named her successor. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, she's an interesting candidate. She's been away from politics for a while, but given the work of like running a nonprofit in Detroit, you have to make some friends along the way. Yeah, and that's where the politics side comes in it. I mean, she's a social worker. She loves that. She loves helping people. And now you have to shake some hands. You have to make some friends in this city. So far, she's been doing all right in donors. Everybody's going to need some corporate donations. She's gotten, good money from DTE Energy, who's, of course, a big sponsor of Thaw. So that relationship is there in the city. So it's quite the political gig, even if it's a nonprofit.
I'm just really interested to see whomever becomes the candidate for mayor, or whoever becomes the mayor, they actually do spread that wealth out a little bit more and try to figure out a master plan that helps that out. You're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with the voice of WDET in the afternoons, All Things Considered host, Russ McNamara. He spoke with some of the candidates running to be the next mayor of Detroit. So, Russ, Santiel Jenkins was the former city council president. The current one is running too, correct?
Oh, yeah, Mary Sheffield. Classic politician. Yeah. When she started, you couldn't really say that she was going to be one of those career politician types. But here we are. I mean, over a decade ago, she was elected for the first time, youngest ever elected to city council. And it's interesting, her path. She stuck with it, and now she looks like the successor to Mike Duggan in many ways. She's got all the relationships. She's there on council now. She's basically using her leadership position at Detroit City Council to, get the things that she wants done. So you would think that, is the natural step up for her moving on to the higher office, as well as she's got the name recognition within the city to actually pull it off. So I find that kind of, interesting the way that she works out. Now, one of the things that she really kind of talked about was improving the middle class. And we hear that a lot from Democratic politicians, like we want to improve the middle class. And I got to give it up to the folks over at Detroit Future City. They've done a fantastic job of tracking the flight of Detroit's middle class. So in the city of Detroit, the news ain't great. Sheffield clearly has picked up on that kind of messaging.
And I would like to see us invest and pour back into our middle-class families, creating more programs, more incentives and support to make sure that we're stabilizing and growing our middle class. I also think we have to continue to address affordable housing.
So was Sheffield the only one talking about the need for more and affordable housing? She wasn't, right?
No, everybody's talked about that because it's obviously one of the most glaring needs in the city of Detroit right now. Well, actually across the country.
Yes.
Because, I mean, people don't have places to live. Rents have gone up. And for, folks making the median income in Detroit and the region, you can't afford a down payment on your first house right now. So it's way different than it was, 15, 20 years ago. And now the Trump administration is planning changes to the Federal Housing Administration. So it might be rough out there. So I do have to say that Sheffield's plan was kind of Duggan-like.
We do have to do better at cultivating an environment that makes it more easier for development to happen in Detroit. There's so many barriers to entry. There's so many issues around zoning and permitting. It's just not an easy business-friendly environment for a lot of people to do business in Detroit.
Okay, so speaking of Mayor Duggan, where does he figure into all of this?
All of it. I mean, because you can't criticize him because he's still the current mayor and you've been working with him for a while. But at the same time, and he's now running for governor. And so therefore, like, you might be working with him again, but at the same time, you're a different person and you have to have your own vision. So I ran out of time with Santil Jenkins. Didn't get to ask directly, but Fred Durhal proudly stated his credentials as a Democrat, but stopped short of criticizing Duggan's decision to run for governor as an independent.
He's going to go across this state. I think he's going to have some support. And I think it'd be foolhardy to count him out.
Okay, so that's not really an endorsement.
No, but it's not a hell no either. So it's very political.
How about Mary Sheffield?
Well, I asked her where she and Duggan differed because they've worked together a ton. Like, she's been in office the entire time Duggan has been in office. So she gave me a kind of a really interesting answer.
I would probably say my attention and compassion for the social issues is there a little bit more. Not saying that he didn't care. I think that he was very operational. Let's get the street lights going, trash picked up, and that was needed. It was needed at a point in Detroit. But now that we are 12 years post-bankruptcy and we are now investing and growing Detroit, we cannot turn an eye on the fact that we still have one of the highest poverty rates in the country.
Okay, that sounds like she's planning a less pragmatic, more compassionate approach, as women tend to do.
I'll leave that comment to you two.
All right.
But
the compassion part, I'll say. Women
Right.
can be pragmatic and compassionate at the same time. That's,
Right.
I'll edit myself there.
And I don't want to say that Duggan wasn't worried about the social issues, but he's also the mayor that appointed James Craig as chief of police for the city of Detroit. So, and that's former Republican gubernatorial candidate James Craig.
That was Tia Graham and Robin Vincent speaking with All Things Considered host Russ McNamara about all the candidates running for mayor in Detroit. Good luck to you all. Coming up, we'll stay on the topic of mayors and discuss the legacy of former Detroit Mayor Coleman Young. Welcome back to the Metro. I'm producer Sam Corey. Thanks for tuning in. Detroit is about to elect a new mayor. And this week, we wanted to understand the significance of one of Detroit's most important mayors, Coleman Young. In this conversation, T and Robin spoke with Wayne State professor Jeff Horner about who Coleman was and why he mattered.
This year, Detroiters will elect their next mayor. And since it's well understood that government should reflect the communities it represents, race is expected to play a role in the election. Throughout most of the city's existence, Detroit has had white mayors. In 1974, Coleman A. Young became the city's first black mayor, starting a trend for black Detroiters as residents continued to elect black men to run the city. Enter current mayor Mike Duggan. He's the first white mayor since Roman Gribbs held the office from 1970 to 74. And Duggan took office while the city was struggling. He was the city's fourth mayor in just 5 years, and Detroit had just declared bankruptcy. Now, his tenure has really been transformative. It's marked by a considerable economic growth that's helped to revitalize certain parts of the city. There's been a small growth in population after the city lost residents for years, and crime rates have been lower.
Robin, we can't ignore the fact that Duggan is a white man leading a majority black city, and his tenure could further the false belief that white leadership leads to economic prosperity and black leadership leads to strife. But this conversation is not black and white, even if all 75 of Detroit's mayors are. Today, we want to explore how the race of Detroit's mayor impacts its citizens and shapes the city's perception as a whole. Now, joining us in studio right now is Jeff Horner. Jeff is a professor of teaching at Wayne State University's Department of Urban Studies. Been on the show before. Welcome back to the Metro, Professor Horner.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, Tia and Robin.
Yes, of course. So you jumped in because we wanted to take a historical look back at Detroit's mayoral history here. You talked about the 1920s, which is an era that I didn't even think to go back to. So can you talk a little bit about the candidate then who was backed by the Ku Klux Klan?
Oh, well, sure. In the mayoral election of 1925, there was a candidate by the name of Charles Bowles who was backed by the KKK. And he actually ran for mayor on a write-in basis and lost the election only because 15,000 votes that he had earned on a write-in basis involved misspellings of his own name, and it was thrown out, and he didn't win. But I mention all that only to point out that while race has always been an issue in Detroit's mayoral elections, or it has been many times, the folks running for mayor typically in more recent times haven't used race as a cudgel, with one major exception I'll perhaps talk about later. But by and large, race has always played a very big factor in Detroit's elections.
And Professor, before we get into Mayor Coleman Young, can you explain a little bit about the state of the city just before he was elected? What contributed to his rise and you know, especially among black Detroiters?
Well, I think in Coleman Young's case is that he had a stellar record as a politician before that. A lot of people, many of my students, don't realize how involved he was in left-wing labor movements and politics. He had been a state senator before he ran for mayor, and he had a very shining record, and he was really emblematic of a very successful, hard-working, hard-fighting politician, and really captured the hearts and minds of Detroit's electorate in 1973 when he won his first election. But I'm also very quick to point out that this was kind of the golden age of black mayors being elected to big city offices, starting
across the country.
Across the country, starting with Carl Stokes in Cleveland in 1967. It's not to say that Mayor Young wouldn't have won with that happening, but to answer your question, what actually happened was he ran on a campaign in a city that was not yet 50% African American, and he ran on a campaign of integrating the police department, which was probably his main message, and that he did.
And, you know, just sticking with that time right before Mayor Coleman Young came in, Detroit, like a lot of other cities, but Detroit had recently gone through a rebellion, and it was going through changes, lots of changes. So could you talk about the changes that possibly led to the rise of Mayor Coleman Young?
Well, I think one big factor, and this aligns with his promise to integrate the Detroit Police Department, was the mayor that succeeded Jerry Kavanaugh, who was mayor in 1967, the mayor that succeeded him, Roman Gribbs, actually doubled down on crime crackdowns and so forth. And so it turned out that Coleman Young's opponent was Police Chief Nichols, I couldn't think of his first name, who promised to continue a crackdown on law and order, which was, you know, code for effectively saying we're going to keep blacks in their place in the city. And, of course, Coleman Young wasn't having any of that, and it was a pretty close election in 1973, I think closer than a lot of people realize. But there it is. He served 5 terms, and he was a hero to many. I was fortunate to teach a class on him 2 years ago, and It wasn't even me teaching it. It was many people who worked for him. It was other scholars who've done a lot of drilling down on him. And the amount of loyalty to him was really astonishing in 2023, still to this day. So race was a big factor in the election of Coleman Young.
And Professor Horner, just sticking there, of course, we're talking about Mayor Coleman Young and his impact here on the city of Detroit and everything that led after that and into where we are today. But I'm thinking about a conversation that Ed Love had about his relationship with Coleman A. Young and how they were good friends and how Coleman A. Young was this person that you could literally just talk to. Uh-huh. He was someone you can easily relate with. Could you talk about how important that was at that time to have a relatable mayor?
Well, I think any mayor who isn't relatable is in trouble. But I agree with you. I think Coleman Young was kind of special. And I'll share, I met Mayor Young twice, neither time when he was mayor, though. And it was I don't know if he was mayor-elect or not at the time, but I was in downtown Detroit. My dad used to take us to get haircuts in downtown Detroit. And Dad recognizes him in a parking garage, and he was a senator then. He said, "Hi, Senator Young. I'm Dave, and this is my son." The first thing he asked me was, "Son, how are you doing in school?" And something I learned in the class was how dedicated he was to education and how important he saw it as. It was kind of an interesting moment. I had no idea who he was at the time. I was like 8th grade or something. And that was a very personal touch, and he didn't have to do that. He was in a hurry to go somewhere. He was either running for mayor or was a mayor-elect at that point. And so that impressed me. That was a retail politician right there.
Yeah. And just to go back to that, were your grades good then?
I'll have to get back to you on that, Tia.
I'm pleading the fifth.
And just sticking there, of course, he was a mayor during much of the white flight era. How was he perceived by white residents in the surrounding region?
Oh, well, again, I don't want to paint with a broad brush here, but there was a lot of ink spilled over Coleman Young and a lot of misinterpretations of things he said, such as asking after he got elected for the for all the crooks and thieves to hit 8 Mile, which was not a way of saying I'm gonna send Detroit's crooks and thieves to 8 Mile. He's saying I want to get them out of the city, and it wasn't anything aimed at the white suburbs. But yeah, there was a lot of hostility. I've looked at a lot of the press at that time, and there was just a lot of hostility that started from a beginning frame of reference that Coleman Young is against the white suburbs.
Yeah.
And many of the people who spoke in my class about him said he was not against white people or white suburbs. He was just pro-black, and he wanted to get people in important positions of power. He didn't fire all the white people who were department heads in his administration. None of that's true. So I can't explain that. You'd have to talk to a media expert on that. But it was very hostile. It was tremendously hostile.
Mm-hmm. And you're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're talking about the history of black leadership in Detroit, and we're asking whether the next mayor should be black. Let's go to the phones and bring Mama Joe from Detroit into the conversation. Mama Joe, thank you for calling The Metro. Should Detroit's next mayor be black?
Honey, is this Robin?
It is.
Well, I just love that voice, first of all.
Thank you,
you
Mama
got power,
Joe.
gal. You got power. I should elect you for mayor.
Thank
But the fact about it is, I'm glad I got in. So I can say this much, honey. This is Mama Joe, known in Detroit for the children call me Mama Joe, the big ones and everything. I was a community leader here for many years with, Coleman Young and Dennis Archer. Remember Jerome Kavanaugh. And all through these years, okay? I know Detroit when it was beautiful all over. It wasn't on west side or east side. It was just beautiful all the way over. And I'm from the south, dear. But now, speaking of who should be, I don't believe in what color a person's supposed to be as far as power and doing something very powerful or negative. We want somebody, we should. But I'm speaking for myself. Me and my great friend Evelyn Dukes the Grosse Pointe Farm. She come from a very wealthy family, white woman. I'm black. And we helped put Mike Duggan in there because we were tired of this garbage can, buck government leadership called to be, and Kwame Kilpatrick just took it, and we were going down the drain in the maggot pile.
Mama Joe, do you think then the question of whether Detroit's next mayor should be black in your eyes, is that a divisive question, an unnecessary question?
It really is unnecessary. We should want somebody, I don't care if they're purple with gold and green stripes. We should want somebody that's going to finish the job that Mike Duggan started. He did a very good job.
Mama Joe, thank you so much for calling the Metro and sharing your thoughts with us. I want to stay on the phones and turn to Brother Ray in Detroit. What do you think?
Yeah, hey, good morning. I think that whether it's first of all, Coleman Young, I don't think he was more pro-black, but he was more pro-equity and equality and justice. But concerning the next mayor of Detroit, whether male or female, they have to show strength and courage, take chances, and be a uniter. And also, will they have to cozy up to Donald Trump and his policies to get anything done? Because we know that President Biden sent a lot of money to Detroit. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, will that spigot be cut off under the Trump administration? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Ray. Which the idea of being a coalition builder, that is something that certainly Mayor Mike Duggan has been known for. Professor Horner, can you just speak to the need for Detroit's next mayor to be that kind of coalition builder?
Yeah, certainly. To be any big city mayor, you have to build a coalition. And this is exactly how Jerry Kavanaugh was elected in 1961, he had a very strong message of inclusion and so forth, and that drew a large enough black coalition to vote for him long before Detroit was a majority black city. But I want to go back. I want to go back to what Mama Joe, I think was her name,
yes,
was saying about she doesn't care about the race, color, or whatever of the next mayor. And it reminded me of, I think it was 2010. I remember getting a call from a reporter. I don't remember from where. Basically asking me the question, and it had never dawned on me before, that after Sheila Cockrell stepped down, she was a council member, white council member.
A white woman, yep.
And after she stepped down, this was the first time in history that Detroit had a fully black city council. And, I thought about it. I said, I thought to myself, this isn't even really relevant, if only because Marianne Mahaffey had been on council for 30 years. I think she was the council chair and top vote getter for about 25 of those years. And what that communicates to me is that Detroit's electorate was far happier with someone who was going to fight and work for them, which is exactly what white Marianne Mahaffey did in her roughly 30 years in office. And so I think this also goes to the work of Mayor Duggan, who also became mayor on a write-in campaign. It was in the primary, mind you, but he still got on the ballot in a write-in campaign, and then won, I think, pretty soundly in 2013. So again, I don't know if that answers your question, Robin, but I think Detroit's electorate wants people that's going to fight for him.
We've been going from the past to the present. I want to go back to the past and move from Mayor Young to Dennis Archer, who became the city's mayor. And I'm wondering how you think he addressed race as a candidate for a city that was 80% black at that time.
I honestly, I went to a number of his speeches in person, and I don't remember Mayor Archer talking much about the impacts of race. It was just assumed, I think. I certainly can't speak for him, and I'm sure I'll be impeached on this after the show, but he knew Detroit was a majority African-American city. By the time he was elected in the mid-'90s, Detroit was probably pushing 80% African-American population, and so he had that to work with. And to talk about inclusion and so forth, he didn't avoid that discussion, but he really came in trying to advance Detroit, trying to leverage dollars out, as the second caller pointed out, to leverage dollars out of Washington, and did a really good job with that. but it never really. I wouldn't associate Archer with being necessarily someone who was giving a strong racial inclusion message. I could be wrong about that, but I don't remember that happening.
We can't talk about the city's mayors without discussing Kwame Kilpatrick, who succeeded Archer.
I've heard of him.
He may have had a tenure that was a bit rife with controversy. How did Kilpatrick's administration affect the city's perception
of?
How did it affect the perception that other people had of the city?
Of a negative perception, or this idea that black leadership, leads us to what we saw.
Sure. So Mayor Kilpatrick was a very controversial mayor, and I think that he hurt his own perception with his first term when he started using taxpayer funds, expensive cars, and so forth. And by the 2005 election, he was in trouble. He was way underwater to another candidate by the name of Freeman Hendricks. And Kilpatrick's supporters then took out an ad in the Michigan Chronicle, the big black newspaper, the biggest black newspaper in the city, the only remaining one as far as I know, and that basically pointed out that Freeman Hendricks' real first name was Helmut, and that he was, this was a way of saying he was a multiracial fellow, and that I'm blacker than other candidates. And that's a true story. And he was, doesn't matter, but Freeman Hendricks is a multiracial person. And, for the research I've done, it's the only time that race has been made an important point by candidates. Race has always played into Detroit's mayoral elections, but where candidates now bring it out, that's like the largest and best example.
That was Tian Robin speaking with Professor Jeff Horner about the legacy of Detroit Mayor Coleman Young. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. This is WDET, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.